You're 12,000 feet above Tehran at dawn, a burning city below, smoke rising like ghosts. Your jet is invisible, until it isn't. You've just broken every rule in the book, left your strike corridor, dived into the most dangerous cubic mile of airspace on Earth, all to save one drone that doesn't even know it's being hunted. You have 45 seconds before an Iranian Yak-130 trainer, a cheap jet with missiles that can kill from angles you can't defend, reaches firing range on your Hermes 900. You have 14 minutes of fuel before you're forced to break west or flame out, and somewhere behind you, silent, dark, radar off, a MiG-29 Fulcrum has been waiting 40 minutes for exactly this mistake. 3 clocks, all ticking down, all converging on one ugly truth. You're out of time in 3 different ways at once. This is the moment an Israeli F-35 pilot made a decision that could have ended in disaster, or rewritten the rules of the war. Stay with me. This is what happens when stealth meets desperation over Tehran. At Aero 6:35 local time, an Israeli F-35 Adir was 2 minutes into a strike run over Tehran when its electro-optical targeting system flagged the contact the pilot wasn't expecting. Low altitude, moving fast. There was no denying it. Iranian aircraft were airborne and heading straight toward an asset Israel absolutely could not lose right now. The EOS, electro-optical targeting system, the F-35's built-in targeting camera mounted under the nose, swung toward the contact. Infrared first, 2 hot spots traced for a twin-engine platform, then electro-optical, sharpening the image until the frame snapped into focus. Single tail, swept wing, side-by-side, 2-seat canopy. This was a Yakovlev Yak-130, NATO reporting name Mitten. The Yak-130 was built to teach Russian pilots how to fly real combat jets. Think of it as the learner's permit version of an Su-30. Except Iran had bolted R-73E infrared homing missiles to the pylons and wired the aircraft's helmet-mounted sighting system for high off-bore sight targeting. The R-73 can lock a target up to 45 degrees off the missile centerline. The pilot doesn't need to point his nose at you. He just needs to look in your general area. Against an F-35, your name ends up on a t-shirt. Against an Israeli Hermes 900 reconnaissance drone with no idea it's being hunted, more than lethal. 6 miles ahead of the Yak-130, a $10 million Hermes 900 was doing what it had done every day of this war. Orbiting at medium altitude, sensors pointed at the ground, feeding real-time targeting coordinates to every strike aircraft in the wave. The Hermes 900 is Israel's eyes, a 36-foot drone built by Elbit that loiters for 30 hours, feeding real-time coordinates through satellite data link. Without it, $500 million in precision munitions becomes expensive gravel on the wrong coordinates. The problem, it tops out at 120 knots. Can't run, can't fight back. Every F-15 waiting for aim points. Every bomb in the queue dependent on the slowest asset in the sky. On the EOS display, the Yak-130's exhaust plumes pushed steadily toward the Hermes orbit. At current heading and speed, the Iranian fighter would reach R-73 range in under 5 minutes. Inside the Yak-130's rear cockpit, the weapons officer watched the Hermes drift across his scope like a slow-moving target in an arcade game. Fat radar return, 12,000 feet, holding its orbit with the patience of something that doesn't know it's about to get deleted. He called range to the pilot, 30 kilometers and closing. The pilot eased the nose down, setting up the classic drone intercept profile they'd rehearsed 100 times at Mashhad. Below the Hermes, angled up. R-73 Seeker looking straight at the drone's engine exhaust. One look, one squeeze. Back in the Adir, 3 clocks started running simultaneously, and none of them were on his side. 5 minutes before the Yak-130 reaches R-73 range on the Hermes, close enough for the Iranian weapons officer to squeeze the trigger and erase Israel's eyes over Tehran. 14 minutes of fuel before the tanks run dry and he's forced to break west for the tanker track over Iraq, whether the Hermes is alive or not. 9 minutes left in his assigned strike corridor before the next wave of Israeli jets comes screaming through the exact same airspace he's about to abandon. 3 countdowns, ticking at different speeds, all converging on the same ugly conclusion. He was running out of time in 3 different ways at once. The ground targets on his original strike list would have to wait. The Hermes couldn't, but the Yak-130 wasn't what worried him. A subsonic trainer versus the most advanced fighter on the planet isn't exactly a prize fight that sells tickets. Everything around the Yak-130 worried him. Intelligence briefings said the Iranians flew Yak-130s alongside MiG-29A Fulcrums. Proper air superiority fighters carrying R-27 medium-range missiles and the same R-73s made lethal from a platform fast enough to use them. The Yaks are plush targets. The Fulcrums hit whatever came to stop them. This Yak appeared to be alone, but it wasn't. A MiG-29 running dark, radar off, IRST on, maintaining strict emissions control, would be invisible to the ASQ-239. Infrared search and track doesn't emit, it receives. The Israeli F-35 pilot took his chances. He dropped toward the city, 25,000 feet, 22,000 feet. The altimeter unwound and Tehran filled the lower half of his helmet visor. Dark neighborhoods stitched between burning wreckage, smoke columns leaning east in the upper winds. The whole sprawl glowing faintly in infrared like a half-lit campfire. He was leaving his corridor, descending into airspace the CAOC hadn't cleared, to protect a drone that didn't know it needed protecting. 2,000 feet below, an Israeli F-35 from a different squadron was 30 seconds into his own bomb run on a regime target in northern Tehran. The pilot had the spice guidance cued, aim point locked, everything textbook, when Link 16 updated with a friendly contact screaming through his altitude block from the northwest. No coordination, no call-out, just a blue triangle cutting across his lane at 500 knots where nothing was supposed to exist. He broke left hard enough to gray out his peripheral vision. The spice guidance went dumb as the jet wrenched off target. By the time he leveled out and keyed the radio to find out who the hell just blew through his corridor, the contact was already below him and still descending. The ground target would have to wait for the next pass. Whoever was in that aircraft was going somewhere in a hurry, and it wasn't anywhere the CAOC had approved. Back in the descending F-35, the pilot saw the blue triangle break left on Link 16 and understood what had just happened. But understanding wasn't the same as stopping. The Yak-130 was 40 seconds closer to the Hermes, and the math only moved in one direction, 15,000 feet. Iranian AAA tracers arced up from the southern districts, unguided, unaimed, just someone on the ground shooting at engine noise. Not a threat, but a reminder that the city was still swinging, and he didn't want to get caught slipping as he was diving headfirst into it. At this point, 5 days of strikes had wiped out most of the radar-guided SAMs. The remaining air defenses were the ones that don't need repair. IR-guided manpads on rooftops. Mobile short-range launchers the Iranians had been shuffling between buildings while the smoke provided cover. No electronic signature. Silent until the motor lights. The distributed aperture system cameras, think of it as a 360-degree security camera system bolted to a fighter jet, 6 infrared eyes that let the pilot see through his own aircraft, would give him maybe 3 seconds of warning if a manpad's launched. Maybe. Every 1,000 feet of descent brought him closer to hostile streets where someone in sandals just needed a rooftop, and the intelligence gaps were measured in city blocks. 13,000 feet, the DAS flashed. Thermal bloom, street level, bearing 2110. The pilot's eyes snapped to the alert. Hotspot rising from between 2 buildings in the southern district. Could be a manpad shoulder tube spitting a missile at him right now. Could be a fuel fire from Tuesday's strikes finally cooking off as a gas main. Could be a car burning on an overpass. The system couldn't tell the difference. And at this altitude, neither could he. 2 seconds to decide, brake hard, and lose the intercept geometry on the Yak, or hold course and bet his life on a sensor that was giving him a question mark instead of an answer. He held, white knuckles on the stick, eyes locked on the DS alert, every nerve in his body screaming to brake left while his training told him to ride it out. The bloom faded, no smoke trail, no missile, not this time, and the altimeter kept unwinding. 20 miles to the east, the lead Fulcrum's wingman was losing patience. 40 minutes of dark sky and empty scopes. The IRST swept its arcs and returned nothing. The same nothing it had returned for the last 2,000 sweeps. His thumb hovered over the radar switch. One pulse, 1 2-second sweep of the Rubin radar, and he'd have a picture of everything within 50 miles. He'd also have a missile riding the beam back to his cockpit before the scope refreshed. His thumb moved back to the throttle. Discipline held. For now, at least. Back in the Adir, as he closed on the Yak, the Israeli pilot selected his weapon. It wasn't the AM-120 AMRAAM. The AMRAAM's radar seeker goes active in the terminal phase. The Yak-130's radar warning receiver would detect the ping in the final seconds. Not sophisticated enough to save the crew, sophisticated enough to tell them something was shooting. A weapons officer who knows he's about to have an early retirement has nothing to lose. A snap-fired R-73 at the Hermes on the way down would hit the drone before the AMRAAM got to the Yak. The Python 5 solved that problem. Rafael's 5th-generation infrared missile, imaging seeker, lock on after launch, cued by the pilot's helmet display. The pilot looks at the target. The helmet tells the missile where to look. The missile launches cold, acquires autonomously, and steers itself home on infrared alone. No radar emission, no electronic signature, a ghost until impact. The Yak-130's warning system would register exactly nothing until the airframe stopped existing. It was a short-range weapon, though. He had to get closer, Inside the Yak-130, the weapons officer called 7 collides. The pilot's helmet crosshair was settling over the Hermes projected position. The R-73 seeker was already tracking the drone's engine heat, a solid tone in his headset confirming what his eyes could see on the scope. A fat, warm, defenseless target drifting through Iranian airspace, like it belonged there. 20 seconds, and this war would have its first Iranian air-to-air victory. He could feel it. Back in the Adir at 12,000 feet, the geometry he needed was specific and unforgiving. Above and behind the Yak-130, offset to the right, engines pointed away from the Iranian aircraft sensors. Pylon 5, looking straight down the Yak's exhaust, the only intercept angle that solves stealth, missile performance, survivability, and escape simultaneously. But that angle pointed his own exhaust at the sky behind him. His engine plumes burned bright against cold pre-dawn darkness for anything with an infrared sensor and a reason to look. Something had a reason. Inside the lead MiG-29, the Fulcrum pilot had been hunting for 40 minutes and finding nothing. Radar off, radio silent. The IRST swept cold sky in steady arcs, looking for the thermal bloom of an engine against pre-dawn darkness. The only way to find a stealth aircraft without giving yourself away. Think of it like hunting in a pitch-black forest with night vision goggles. You can see anyone carrying a torch, but the moment you turn on your own flashlight, every hunter in the woods knows exactly where you are. 5 days of war had taught the surviving Iranian pilots one rule: emit your radar, and that's the last mistake you'll ever make. So he flew dark, patient, the IRST cycling through its scan pattern like a sniper waiting for movement. His wingman held formation a mile to the east, running the same profile. Somewhere above them, Israeli jets were tearing the Iranian military apart. The Fulcrum pilot couldn't see them, couldn't find them, but if one of them did something aggressive, descended with hot engines, opened a weapons bay, broke from the pattern that had kept them invisible, the IRST would catch the bloom, and at that point, the geometry would finally work in his favor. Back in the Adir, as he closed in on the Yak, the Israeli pilot selected his weapon. It wasn't the AM-120 AMRAAM. The AMRAAM's radar seeker goes active in the terminal phase. The Yak-130's radar warning receiver would detect the ping in the final seconds. Not sophisticated enough to save the crew. Sophisticated enough to tell them something was shooting. A weapons officer who knows he's about to have an early retirement has nothing to lose. A snap-fired R-73 at the Hermes on the way down would hit the drone before the AMRAAM got to the Yak. The Python 5 solved that problem. Rafael's 5th-generation infrared missile, imaging seeker, lock-on after launch, cued by the pilot's helmet display. The pilot looks at the target. The helmet tells the missile where to look. The missile launches cold, acquires autonomously, and steers itself home on infrared alone. No radar emission, no electronic signature, a ghost until impact. The Yak-130's warning system would register exactly nothing until the airframe stopped existing. It was a short-range weapon, though. He had to get closer. Inside the Yak-130, the weapons officer called 7 kilometers. The pilot's helmet crosshair was settling over the Hermes' projected position. The R-73 seeker was already tracking the drone's engine heat, a solid tone in his headset confirming what his eyes could see on the scope. A fat, warm, defenseless target drifting through Iranian airspace like it belonged there. 20 seconds, and this war would have its first Iranian air-to-air victory. He could feel it. Back in the Adir at 12,000 feet, the geometry he needed was specific and unforgiving. Above and behind the Yak-130, offset to the right, engines pointed away from the Iranian aircraft sensors. Pylon 5 looking straight down the Yak's exhaust. The only intercept angle that solves stealth, missile performance, survivability, and escape simultaneously. But that angle pointed his own exhaust at the sky behind him. His engine plumes burned bright against cold pre-dawn darkness for anything with an infrared sensor and a reason to look. Something had a reason. Inside the lead MiG-29, the Fulcrum pilot swept across the southern sky, and the scope blew. Thermal contact bearing 185. Something descending fast with hot engines and no radar return, which meant stealth, which meant Israeli, which meant exactly what he was looking for. He didn't touch the radar. He didn't key the radio. He didn't even breathe. 40 minutes of darkness. 40 minutes of nothing. And now, for the first time tonight, something warm was falling out of the sky. He brought the nose around, slow and steady, the way a predator turns its head when prey finally breaks cover. The IRST held the track. The contact was still outside R-27 range, too far to shoot, but the bearing wasn't drifting. It was locked. And the thermal signature wasn't just growing. It was blooming brighter with every sweep. like watching a match being struck in a dark room. Whatever was descending through the darkness over Tehran didn't know he was here. His thumb rested on the weapon selector. Not yet, but soon. He pushed the throttles forward. Back in the Adir, the ASQ-239, the F-35's electronic warfare brain, a system that listens to every radar, radio, and data link signal within 100 miles and builds a real-time map of who's looking where, scanned every frequency across the electromagnetic spectrum and heard nothing behind him. No radar sweep, no radio check-in, no IFF interrogation. The silence could mean empty sky. It could mean perfect Iranian emissions discipline. The pilot had no way to distinguish between the two, and the Hermes had no time for him to figure it out. 10,000 feet. The Yak-130's twin exhaust signatures burned bright on EOS. Nose pointed at the Hermes orbit, seconds from firing. Python 5 range in 45 seconds. The Yak was inside 20 seconds of hitting the drone. Somewhere behind the Adir, a threat he could not confirm and could not dismiss was either there or it wasn't. Below him, a city that had been at war for 5 days was still shooting at anything it could hear, and he was descending through all of it to save an asset that would never know how close it came. His left hand moved to the weapon select. For the first time in 40 years, an Israeli pilot was about to take an air-to-air shot against a manned aircraft. The last time was 1985. An F-15 Baz downing 2 Syrian MiG-23s over Lebanon. It was time now for history to repeat itself. The weapons bay had to open. For less than 2 seconds, the F-35's radar cross-section would bloom from marble to barn door, and every surviving Iranian sensor sweeping the sector would get a contact where nothing had existed a second before. That's exactly what the ASQ-239 did. It had been silently tracking the timing of every Iranian radar sweep for the entire mission, counting the gaps between pulses like a safecracker, listening for the click. The pilot timed the release to the gap between sweeps. The jet knew when nobody was looking. He looked at the Yak-130 through his helmet visor. 2 bright engine plumes, nose pitched toward the Hermes, seconds from firing. The helmet-mounted display fed target coordinates to the Python 5. The missile knew where to go before it left the rail. But it had a problem the pilot couldn't solve for it. Tehran was burning. 5 days of strikes had turned the city into an infrared nightmare. Smoldering command posts, fuel depots belching heat, debris fields radiating residual warmth across the entire urban sprawl. Picking 2 turbofans out of that background is like finding a specific pair of headlights on a highway, where everyone drives lifted trucks with their high beams on at night in the rain. The seeker had to be smarter than the noise. A miss meant the Yak-130 crew goes defensive, radios a contact report, and every surviving SAM operator in Tehran learns an Israeli aircraft is at this altitude in this sector, at this exact moment. The F-35's invisibility, the single advantage that makes every other advantage possible, evaporates in one transmission. And whatever was lurking behind the Adir would have a bearing to converge on. It was now or never. The weapons bay door split open. Wind noise flooded the cavity. The airframe shuddered as the clean aerodynamic shape became a brick for exactly as long as the rail needed to release. The Python 5 dropped off the station and cleared the bay. Doors slammed shut. The marble returned. Total exposure, less than 2 seconds. Every radar in Tehran had just been handed a window to spot the most expensive aircraft in Israeli inventory. Whether anyone was looking, that was the bet. Inside the MiG-29, the IRST return flickered. The thermal contact the Fulcrum pilot had been tracking, steady bloom, steady bearing, held for the last 90 seconds, spiked for a single frame, and then collapsed into nothing. The contact was gone, vanished from the scope like it had never existed. The pilot swept the sensor back across the bearing. Cold sky. Empty air. He held the scan for 10 seconds. 20. Nothing. Whatever had been descending over Tehran with hot engines and no radar return had either left the area or stopped existing as a thermal source. He would never know which. He kept looking regardless. The Python 5's rocket motor ignited, and the weapon screamed along the intercept trajectory the helmet had programmed, climbing slightly, then arcing down toward the Yak-130's exhaust. The imaging seeker activated. It saw Tehran. It saw the fires. It saw 2 turbofans pushing a 7-ton aircraft through clean air at 500 knots. The seeker stopped searching and started closing. Inside the Yak-130, the weapons officer never saw it. The radar warning receiver stayed silent. The missile approach warning system, overwhelmed by infrared noise rising from a burning city, registered nothing. The R-73 had a solid tone on the Hermes. 5 seconds from firing, the pilot's finger rested on the release. The Python 5 hit the Yak-130 between the engines. The EOS footage released by the IDF the following day showed the airframe erupt. Infrared bloom whiting out the sensor for a single frame, then burning wreckage trailing smoke through the pre-dawn sky over the Lavazan mountains. 2 heat signatures separated from the fireball, ejection seats firing, both crew members punching out. The aircraft that was 5 seconds from the first Iranian air-to-air victory in this war came apart over northern Tehran, while the drone it was hunting continued its orbit. Sensors pointed at the ground, completely unaware of what just happened behind it. Then the pilot keyed the radio. Completed. Target down. The target is down. Continuing to strike. He didn't circle. Didn't watch the wreckage fall. The Adir rolled back onto its original strike heading, and the EOS cued the first ground target on his list, the one he'd abandoned 3 minutes ago to chase a trainer jet through the most dangerous sky on Earth. Weapons bay open, a Raphael Spice precision-guided bomb dropped off the internal station, wings deploying, GPS and electro-optical guidance steering it toward a regime target below. Bay doors closed, already cueing the next aim point before the first bomb hit the ground. And then he got back to work.